Hi, all. Welcome back to the Congressional App Challenge Debugged podcast. I'm your host, Medha, and today our episode will actually be hosted by Suhaani, who is a member of the Congressional App Challenge Debugged Alumni Advisory Board's podcast team. Suhaani, take it away. It's going to be great.
Yeah, thank you, Medha. Yeah, so this week we're going to be talking about finance and technology and how they intersect. And today we have our panelists, Jeremy and Angie. So, Jeremy, do you want to first go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sorry to interrupt. Suhaani, sorry to interrupt. I think you said finance instead of political science.
Oh, political science, yes. Okay, I'll redo that. Yeah.
So let's
Okay.
redo that.
Yeah, thank you, Medha. So today we're going to be talking about how political science and technology can work together, and we have our panelists, Jeremy and Angie. So, Jeremy, do you want to first go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much, Suhaani. My name is Jeremy. I'm from Tucson, Arizona. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm currently in law school working at the intersections of technology, labor studies, and policy.
And Angie, what about you?
So hi, I'm Angie. I work in digital policy and global affairs. I also work in the crossroads of technology and policy, but mainly in international governance. And I am based in New Jersey, and I currently work as a research analyst at Swaps Monitor Publications, where I research and track financial instruments.
Okay, yeah, so we have two fields of expertise here. So let's go ahead and start talking about what are the biggest ways that policy and technology can work together. And Angie, let's start with you.
Sure. I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, so how can policy and technology work together? Like, what's the biggest ways they can be utilized?
Sure. So I think, sorry, I just couldn't hear you, and I'm a little bit nervous. I'm sorry if you have to take this off of the actual,
No worries. No worries.
yeah,
Take your time.
okay. Can we go to Jeremy? I'm sorry, I don't know how to
Yeah,
answer that
of
question right
course.
now.
You're
Yeah,
totally good.
Jeremy, go ahead.
You want to intro me, Suhaani, for the question, or you want me to just go?
Oh, yeah, I'll go ahead and do that then. So, what are the biggest ways
Okay,
that
great.
political science and technology can work together?
Thanks so much, Suhaani. That's a great question. There's so many ways that they work together. For the first part, I think engineers and policy people have very different skills and very different brains. And a lot of the times they can be siloed and they don't really work together on the questions that we're all faced with. And so I think it's really important that there are people who have both of those skill sets, maybe like some of you in the audience, who can work across those boundary lines and think about the ethics and consequences of new technologies, what regulation or changes need to happen related to certain engineering choices or policy choices, and how those things can be implemented in a software ecosystem.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And Angie, do you feel ready to answer that question? If not, it's more than
Um,
okay. We can try something else.
yeah, yeah. No, I completely agree with Jeremy. I think they touched on really important points of kind of understanding, being able to understand certain regulations that exist within the political science landscape. And I think also, aside from understanding what's currently happening or different current events now, I think a lot of political science students or professionals end up learning a lot of different theories and a lot of history that kind of birth these theories, and then being able to kind of implement that into digital policy these days. So I think it's really important that once we have those professionals that are interested in political science or different fields within that umbrella, that they also kind of garner that same passion towards technology as well, and kind of reshaping how we treat digital policy globally.
Okay, so you mentioned digital policy, and could you just expand a little bit about like an example or how exactly that term is used?
Sure. So a lot of the times, digital policy is kind of misunderstood in different ways because of how interchangeably people use it. So a lot of people will talk about digital policy when they're talking about trust and safety, or when they're talking about privacy implications for users, or when they're talking about digital governance or internet governance as well. And then on top of that, AI governance. So I think that digital policy is a term that's really meant to umbrella all of these different components of digital technologies and how we use them. But I think it's really important to kind of being able to separate them. So within my experience, I've worked a lot in um, uh, kind of in internet governance, and also the finance and economic development world. So, for example, I was working on understanding how sanctions affected the internet and how it affected internet access to people that not necessarily those sanctions were intended for. And that is covered more in digital governance, but it still has those components of digital policy because you're looking at the different policy that affect people through these digital technologies.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. So, would you say when we're dealing with sensitive data or sensitive political data, often would that fall under the umbrella of of that type of policy?
Yes, 100%. I think it's really important to discuss different components of, or different issues that arise from data or in privacy, and kind of having, kind of understanding the regulations that are involved in that. Yeah.
Okay, so Jeremy, I want to follow up on also one of your answers. So you mentioned it's important to have expertise in both of those fields. So, and looking at how the ethics of that situation, could you expand a little bit about some of the ethical dilemmas that you faced, or how policy could be working through that?
Absolutely. So I'll talk about a very popular topic right now, AI. I'm sure a lot of you guys use it or have thought about it, but there are tons of issues and ethical issues around the use of it. You have one side of it where the data that's being used to train these large language models and other forms of automated systems are being trained on other people's work. And so whether it's Taylor Swift or your favorite comic book artist, they're kind of upset that some of this stuff is being used without their consent or without prior agreement. On the other side of that, you have workers all the time who are reasonably upset because their jobs might be changing or being taken away by changes related to technology. And so there's tons of ethical dilemmas that come up in these fields, and you need people who have backgrounds in things like sociology, in political science, and the law to help navigate these questions for policymakers, executives, technologists, because all these things don't, work in a vacuum.
Exactly.
Okay, awesome.
I completely agree.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah, exactly. I completely agree. And one of the items that I have when uh, I've been so like blessed to be able to work in the past is kind of how countries approach biometrics and lethal autonomous weapons as well, regarding their AI policy. So specifically, I was doing research for Nigeria and kind of understanding what they were doing. And within political science and having that expertise, it's really important to understand like the implications of lethal autonomous weapons, or what biometrics, not only what it is. So you may not be a biology major or someone in the healthcare field, but what those implications are to a community of people. And beyond, and that extends beyond national borders and beyond the domestic borders that we have here.
Okay, and you mentioned the term biometrics and you doing research on that. Could you just explain a little bit more in layman terms of what that means and how that applies to policy?
Sure. So biometrics really just involves a lot of different behavioral and physical characteristics from an individual. So that can include your fingerprints, your face, the structure of your face, the geometry of your hand, maybe the way that you sign. So that's more like a behavioral characteristic, the way that you sign your name, the way that your keystroke pattern. So the way that you actually type on a phone or on your laptop. And these are used mainly for identity management. So a lot of the times, you'll log on to your phone and you'll use Face ID. So that's a part of biometrics. And then on the flip side, in a more political science sense, it's often used in border control. So as recently, I went on a flight and I found out that there's this service called Clear that helps you kind of pass through TSA and all the kind of hard things that you have to do at the airport when you're trying to fly. Um, but in order to do that, you have to kind of register through your iris and your face and your fingerprints. And a lot of people have some kind of fears about that because, it's kind of difficult to kind of describe exactly how you want to be identified or, how personal those things are to you. And even though it involves a lot of the different sciences like biological, behavioral, mathematical kind of sciences, I think it's still important for political science majors to kind of be interested in those different fields and understand how that can affect a group of people. So, for example, sorry, I slipped my mind. I don't have an example. I'll try to come back with one.
Okay, yeah, that's perfect actually. And so you mentioned some different fields that political science and technology can work with. So in particular with biology. And Jeremy, could you maybe mention some things that are within your field of expertise?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a lawyer, which is a scary thing to be in the world because there's so many problems that exist, and there are big consequences to making those mistakes. And so one of the things that lawyers in tech policy do is they advise the engineers and the policy team and the trust and safety team on different emerging issues going on. So we'll take Angie's awesome example of Clear and biometric data. So if I was a lawyer in that field and for that company, one of the big issues I would have is like, what are we doing with that data? Are we sending it and sharing it with other people? How are we housing it? Are we making it anonymous or anonymizing it so that it's not searchable by other entities in case it leaked? Are there different issues in different countries that we operate in? Say, Clear is also being used in Canada. Is there different rules there? So are these tons of questions that everyday people don't have the answers to? So you need sort of specialized professions and fields to give advice on to make sure that things are being done in a way that doesn't have consequences for the company or for the individual.
Okay, perfect. So those are some important ways that technology and policy can work together once you've gone into the field and really understand how in depth about each of those subjects. But I want to also touch on what got you interested on that intersection and how you got into it in the first.
Yeah, I would love to. So I was a geek. I loved computers. I loved thinking about the future and like flying cars and all this. And I grew up in a time which feels like forever ago in the 2010s, where there was a real great feeling that technology had the power to change the world, and I really wanted to be on that wave. And so I started reading magazines in high school by this thing called Wired, which is still around and great if you're interested in. And I just kind of felt like I wanted to be somebody that knew how to program and understood those things, but I had imposter syndrome, like probably a lot of you do. And so I went to college and I enrolled in my first CS class and I said, "Oi, this is a lot harder than I thought. I have this ambition to go to graduate school. I want to work in tech. And so I took a non-traditional path, which I think a lot of you will end up, doing because life is that way. And I started running what's called a hackathon, which is sort of like probably the Congressional App Challenge, where we bring together students from around the country to work on problems. Some of them were designers, some of them were engineers, some of them were political science students interested in, humanitarian issues. And so I got involved in the leadership of that and used that as a platform to get into the tech industry and then further into tech policy as I went into my graduate program in law. But there's no singular path. You don't have to get into the best school. You don't have to know 1,000 different programming languages. You don't have to be reading the New York Times every day. You just have to have a passion for helping people's lives and understanding how integrated these digital technologies are to our everyday existence now.
That's awesome. Suhaani, I think that your recording stopped. So what other questions do you want to ask? I can take over. That was the last question. It was just so Angie,
Yeah.
Jeremy, thank you so much. That was such an incredible journey. And I think so similar to a lot of journeys people do have when they first enter undergrad and take their first computer science class. And so it's great to hear about that experience and that journey for you. Angie, would love to hear your journey.
Yeah, definitely. So, I had like a really like non-traditional journey as well. Um, to start off, I also grew up, I was a teenager in the 2010s, kind of, um, and I grew up in a low income community. So a lot of the times, like we didn't really have access to the internet, but, our mayor, was able to kind of, lobby for more funding and, was able to kind of provide access to these technologies to us when we were young. Things that, I didn't have a personal computer at home or a family computer, but I was able to go to the library because they always had something easily available for me. That being said, I actually studied English literature for my undergraduate degree because I wanted to become a teacher to become a teacher in communities similar to where I grew up in. And so after COVID hit, I actually had to take another position as an account manager at a hardware and software reseller. And they actually now own the Rutgers Stadium, SHI. So, I mean, I guess I can say that I was always fascinated by technology, but it wasn't until my experience at SHI that I actually was able to get more experience, not really necessarily coding or getting into like the techie stuff, but being able to get exposed into how different government agencies or education institutions have access to licenses and different technologies. That being said, once the pandemic lockdown hit, I really started to think about exactly where I wanted my career to go. And ultimately, I started reading about different career paths that I've always wanted to kind of jump into. And what I landed on was international relations and diplomacy. But specifically, I wanted to kind of understand how technology can affect whether it's positively or negatively for marginalized communities around the world. And while I was pursuing that, I was actively engaging in kind of different internship or fellowship opportunities. So I was part of the Law and Policy Foundry. I found an internship with Digital Medusa where I was able to do that work with sanctions effects on the internet and different other projects as well. So ultimately, I had a really kind of non-traditional segue into digital policy. But ultimately, what really led me to have a huge passion is seeing what the passion that everyone else has. So in different ways, I was able to also find these conferences, find these meetups. I attend All Tech is Human events here in New York City all the time. And I guess kind of having that community around me, I also have imposter syndrome, and I also get a little nervous when talking about my career and what I specialize in and everything. But everyone in this community is so open to giving advice and open to not just like personal advice, but career advice as well. So for anyone that's out there, like really trying to figure out exactly what their niche is, you have time. You have the resources. Everyone is always really available to just speak to anyone that's passionate, because ultimately we all want to make the world a better place. So yeah, I kind of segue away from what my experience has been, but that's really why I'm so passionate about this, because I can probably talk about it all day.
Those are such great experiences, and I think that you shouldn't discount your past experiences. I think it
Hmm.
sounds like you've been able to leverage those experiences in your current job and your current day to day, which is so incredible. And I wanna ask a question based off the last thing you said to both you, Angie and Jeremy. What is the best piece of advice that you've received and that you would like to share to people that are also interested in a similar intersection of political science and technology?
Yeah, definitely. So I think my advice to anyone who's young and interested in the intersection of technology, political science, and other kind of liberal artsy types of majors is to always embrace that interdisciplinary learning, and seek different and diverse experiences. And the third thing is just really stay curious about how technology shapes society. Like every time a new technology comes out, really start to think, how is this going to affect people? Luckily for me, I was in grad school. I was in my last year of grad school when ChatGPT came out, and I was so excited to write a paper on it. So that's another thing, is that if you are still in school and you're still but you don't necessarily have certain courses or clubs or anything where you can kind of expand this passion, try to channel that into your writing and try to channel that into the assignments that you have. Um, and that's ultimately like the biggest advice I have, is just try to channel this passion into all the things that you do, because ultimately you'll be able to enjoy it better. I like writing, so I start writing about the way that certain technologies can affect people, but maybe you would rather get into public speaking. And so networking events might actually be better for you to kind of explore this field.
I love that advice. Jeremy, would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I have a lawnmower going in the background, so I don't know how my audio quality is going
We're
to.
good.
Okay.
You're good. I don't hear it. Yeah.
Oh, rad. Okay. Um, well, first of all, Angie, you captured it so beautifully. I totally agree with all of that. I'll keep mine short. The biggest thing that I learned in my short time is that there is no script. You might believe that you have to do something to get to some place you want to be, but in the end of the day, just be yourself. You're amazing, and just keep pushing forward without, fear of what's next. Because at the end of the day, there is no path but the one you choose to go on.
Such great pieces of advice. I mean, the best piece of advice I've ever received was take a look at time that you spend doing rather than doing what you think you should do. And I think that's both of your advices combined. And I just love the amplification of being genuine, and really being passionate and true to yourself, that both of you seem to be emphasizing, which I think is really important for our listeners to hear about, because there is no one true path. Um, it's there's one path that you can follow, and then you can drop off and follow a different path and forge your own. Well, thank you both for taking the time to talk to our listeners. Thank you, Suhaani, for moderating most of the episode and doing such a great job. Really appreciate it. And lastly, thank you to our listeners for taking the time to tune in to this week's podcast, and we'll catch you next week for a new episode. Bye, all.